6 years of exile couldn't prepare Tobias for this moment. A young Lacostran girl stands trembling before his cliffside shelter, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please, mighty human. My mother was taken by enemies." The Iron Nomad's spiral birthmark on his arm seems to burn as she speaks. He swore never to return to that life of violence. But her plea echoes in the cavern of his solitude, demanding an answer he spent years avoiding. The spiral birthmark on Tobias's arm feels heavy today. It twists from his wrist to his elbow like a dark coiled serpent under his skin. This mark isn't just ink. It's a prison of memory, each loop containing moments he'd rather forget. His daily routine revolves around avoiding two things: raiders and his own reflection. He doesn't look at the polished metal plate he uses as a mirror. The face there shows someone he doesn't recognize anymore. The caustic dust of Eridan 6 has etched fine lines around his eyes that mirror the jagged patterns on his arm. Both tell the same story of weathering and survival. Every time he polishes his sword, the rhythmic motion reminds him of skills he vowed never to use again. The cloth moves in circular patterns that match the birthmark's spiral. He can feel the muscle memory in his arms, the way his body remembers combat stances even when his mind rejects them. The blade catches the dim light of his shelter, flashing like a warning. He sleeps with his bow in hand, fingers curled around the familiar curve of wood. This isn't from courage. It's from the cold certainty that his father's enemies will eventually find him. They've been hunting him for 6 years, and he knows their patience will outlast his solitude. The bowstring stays taut, ready to sing. His shelter faces the barren cliffs deliberately. From this angle, he can't see the nomadic trails winding through the valley below. He chooses this view of solid rock instead of the comings and goings of the people he left behind. The cliffs don't move, don't change, don't carry memories of violence. Some days the birthmark seems darker, the lines sharper against his skin. It almost looks like fresh ink on those mornings when he wakes with the taste of blood in his mouth, from dreaming of old battles. He's noticed it seems to react to nearby violence, tightening when raiding parties pass through the lower valleys. The skin prickles as if warning him of approaching danger. Combat veterans often develop rituals to control traumatic memories. Tobias has his own version: the precise arrangement of his weapons, the careful checking of perimeter traps, the way he counts his breaths when the wind sounds like approaching footsteps. These small ceremonies keep the past at bay, or at least make it manageable. The wind carries sounds that aren't there most nights. He hears the clash of steel sometimes, or the cries of wounded men. These are memories of battles he left behind, ghosts that followed him into exile. They whisper from the cliffs and howl through the narrow passages around his shelter. This mark represents everything. Tobias fled, a legacy of blood he can't wash away no matter how hard he scrubs at it with rough soap and sand. It connects him to a past that wants to pull him back into its violent embrace. Each spiral turn feels like another chain linking him to the warlord's son he used to be. The girl called Aleliana didn't find Tobias by accident. She tracked him deliberately, following whispers and half-remembered stories about the one human who might understand what her people faced. Her arrival broke 6 years of uninterrupted isolation, cutting through the silence like a knife through old scar tissue. She stood there small and determined, a fragile creature who had crossed dangerous lands alone. She called him mighty human, and the title landed like a condemnation. Each syllable felt heavy with expectations he had deliberately abandoned. Her eyes held that particular fear he remembered seeing in his father's captives. Not just terror, but the deep resignation of those who know they're facing something beyond their power to resist. They were wide and dark, reflecting the bleak landscape around them, but holding a spark of desperate hope. Her trembling hands held no weapons, only a small pouch of dark soil from her ravaged village. The dirt smelled of smoke and crushed herbs, a scent that spoke of destruction rather than growth. She spoke of Lacostran healers, people who mend broken bones and wounded creatures rather than break them further. Her words painted pictures of gardens and healing chambers that stood in sharp contrast to the barren world Tobias inhabited. Desperate, messengers often amplify their vulnerability to trigger protective instincts. Aleliana didn't just stand there. She made sure he saw how her knees shook, how her breath came in shallow bursts. She mentioned enemies at first in general terms, watching his reactions carefully. Only when her eyes caught the spiral mark on his arm did she specify the Iron Nomads, her voice dropping to a whisper as if naming them might summon their presence. The plea wasn't just for help. It became a mirror held up to his abandoned humanity. Tobias saw himself reflected in her frightened eyes, not as the exile he had become, but as the warrior she needed him to be. The word mother hung between them like a physical weight, reminding him of family bonds he had severed years ago. He remembered his own mother's face, the way she had looked at him before he left, her eyes holding a different kind of fear, the fear of a parent watching their child choose a dangerous path. Eleliana's persistence unraveled his carefully constructed numbness. She didn't plead or beg beyond that first request. She simply stood there, a living testament to everything he had turned away from, her small frame holding more courage than he had shown in 6 years of hiding. The wind carried the scent of her village's soil, mixing with the caustic dust of Eridan 6, creating a strange aroma that spoke of both destruction and the possibility of regrowth. Her presence forced him to remember that people still lived out there beyond his cliffs, people who needed protection rather than conquest. She represented a different kind of strength, the kind that seeks to preserve rather than dominate. The spiral on his arm seemed to pulse in response to her words, as if recognizing that this moment would define whether it remained a mark of shame or could become something else entirely. Tobias turns his back to the girl, his shoulders stiff with the movement. The words leave his mouth like stones dropped into dust. I can't help you. He expects to hear her retreating footsteps, the soft shuffle of disappointment moving away from his shelter. That's how it always goes with intruders. They come, they ask, they leave when refused. The wind feels colder against his neck where her gaze rests, but her footsteps don't retreat. Instead, her voice comes again, softer now, but strangely persistent. She speaks of her people's understanding of pain, how Lacostran healers learn to recognize its many forms. They know the difference between the clean hurt of a fresh wound and the deeper ache of old scars. Her words weave through the space between them, finding cracks in his armor he didn't know existed. Her quiet persistence begins to unravel the careful numbness he's built over 6 years. Each sentence she speaks feels like a thread being pulled from a tightly woven cloth. Tobias remembers another child then, a boy younger than Eleliana, with wide eyes that held no understanding of the violence about to descend upon him. The memory surfaces unexpected and sharp, cutting through his defenses. Psychological patterns show that refusal often precedes major turning points. Tobias stands at such a moment now, his back still turned but his attention fully captured. The memory unfolds completely, his father's command to prove loyalty through murder, the weight of the offered blade in his hands, the way the training yard dust had smelled of iron and anticipation. He remembers how his fingers had refused to close around the hilt properly. His hands remember the weapon's weight even now. They recall the exact balance of that particular knife, how the leather wrapping felt against his palm. More importantly, they remember the refusal, the deliberate opening of fingers, the letting go that felt like both failure and triumph. That single act of defiance cost him everything he had known until that moment. That refusal cost him his family but saved his soul from something worse. He became an exile instead of a murderer, choosing loneliness over complicity. The spiral on his arm had burned that day too, as if protesting the path he chose. Now another child stands before him, her presence offering a different kind of test altogether. She doesn't ask him to kill, she asks him to protect. Eleliana remains perfectly still behind him. He can hear her breathing, a steady rhythm that contrasts with his own uneven breaths. The dust motes dance in the light between them, particles suspended in a moment of decision. Her small hands still hold the pouch of soil from her village, a tangible piece of the world beyond his self-imposed exile. The spiral on his arm feels suddenly warmer, as if stirring from long dormancy. The boy Tobias spared would be nearly Eleliana's age now, if he survived the harsh world beyond that training yard. Tobias rarely allows this memory to surface, keeping it buried beneath layers of daily survival. The recollection feels dangerous, like handling unstable explosives from the old colonial armories. Eleliana's quiet questions about why someone would take her mother force the memory into sharp focus. Her words act like probes finding their way into sealed compartments of his mind. The images return with startling clarity, each detail preserved as if frozen in time. He sees the training yard's packed earth, the way dust motes danced in the afternoon light. His father's disappointed glare burns across the years, that particular expression of contempt that could make seasoned warriors flinch. The terrified child stands between them, small and shaking, his eyes wide with incomprehension of the violence about to be demanded of him. His half-sister Lyra watched from the shadows that day, a silent witness to his defiance. Tobias catches a glimpse of her face in his memory, her features half hidden but her attention absolute. She saw everything: the offered blade, his hesitation, the moment his fingers refused to close around the hilt. Her presence added another layer to the moment, making his rebellion a witnessed act rather than a private struggle. The spiral mark on his arm burned as brightly then as it does now, a visible manifestation of the conflict tearing through him. The coiled pattern seemed to tighten against his skin, responding to the tension in the air. Each loop felt like a constraint, a physical representation of the legacy he was being asked to embrace. His father's words echo across the years with undiminished force. Mercy makes you weak. The sentence hangs in the air, followed by the colder conclusion. Weakness gets you killed. The words weren't just advice, they were a fundamental law of survival in his father's world. A creed written in blood and enforced through violence. Tobias chose weakness that day according to his father's definition. He let the knife fall from his fingers, watching it embed itself in the dust between them. The act felt like both failure and liberation, a rejection of everything he had been trained to become. That single decision started the chain of events that led to his exile. He has spent 6 years proving that particular strength. His survival in the harsh wilderness of Eridan 6 demonstrates that mercy doesn't necessarily lead to death. His careful preparations, his knowledge of the land, his ability to live without drawing attention, these all testify to a different kind of power altogether. Eleliana represents what that spared boy might have become. She stands before him now not as a victim, but as someone fighting for another person's life. Her courage mirrors what he hopes that boy might have found somewhere in this harsh world. She embodies the possibility that acts of mercy can create rather than destroy, that spared lives can grow into something meaningful. The memory shifts from burden to justification as he looks at her. That long-ago decision now feels less like rebellion and more like preparation. He refused to take one life years ago, and now another life stands before him asking to be saved. The symmetry feels almost purposeful, as if his entire exile has been leading to this exact moment of choice. Tobias's shelter has withstood sandstorms that stripped rock from the cliffs and raids that left blood on his doorstep. It holds firm against everything except this small girl's quiet determination. The stone walls that protected him for 6 years suddenly feel like they're crumbling inward, the carefully arranged space becoming a cage rather than a refuge. He looks at his weapons lined against the wall, then at Eleliana's face. Her expression holds no judgment, only that terrible hope that feels heavier than any weapon he's ever carried. The polished wood of his bow gleams in the dim light, the string coiled tight and ready. His swords rest in their scabbards, the leather worn smooth from years of maintenance without use. The spiral birthmark on his arm begins to prickle strangely. It doesn't just burn anymore. It feels like it's moving beneath his skin, the coiled pattern twisting as if awakened from long dormancy. The sensation spreads up his arm, a tingling awareness that connects directly to the decision forming in his mind. The mark seems to pulse in time with the girl's steady breathing. He realizes his exile wasn't penance, it was cowardice dressed up as principle. Hiding here wasn't about rejecting violence, but about avoiding responsibility. The distinction suddenly matters, cutting through years of self-deception. He wasn't protecting his soul by hiding. He was letting others suffer while he pretended to heal. Eleliana speaks softly of her mother's healing hands, how they could mend broken creatures that others would leave for dead. She describes watching her set a bird's shattered wing, her fingers moving with precise gentleness. The memory makes her voice steady for the first time since she arrived. Her words paint pictures of compassion that stand in stark contrast to the world Tobias has known. Reclusive individuals often break isolation when presented with meaningful purpose. The pattern holds true here. Tobias feels the walls of his self-imposed prison cracking under the weight of something larger than his personal demons. The girl's mission gives shape to formless years of survival, offering direction where there was only aimless endurance. His own hands, calloused from 6 years of chopping wood and setting traps, remember how to hold weapons properly. The muscle memory returns unexpectedly, his fingers curling around imaginary hilts. They recall the exact pressure needed to draw a bowstring to full tension, the way a sword's balance should feel in combat stance. These were lessons he thought he'd forgotten but were merely sleeping. The air in the shelter shifts suddenly. The ever-present caustic dust suddenly carries the scent of impending rain, a rare occurrence on Eridan 6. The change feels significant, like the world itself acknowledging the turning point. The metallic tang gives way to the cleaner smell of moisture gathering in the atmosphere. He picks up his bow. The decision isn't made through conscious thought, it accepts itself, rising from someplace deeper than reason. The wood feels familiar against his palm, the weight both strange and comforting after so long. His fingers trace the carved patterns he made during lonely nights, each groove telling its own story of exile. They'll travel by night, using darkness as their first ally. The decision carries practical considerations: fewer patrols, better cover, cooler temperatures, but also symbolic weight. Moving under darkness feels appropriate for stepping back into a world he abandoned. The night will hide them from sight while they navigate the dangerous space between who Tobias was and who he might become. Ileliana leads through the darkness with uncertain confidence, her small form almost disappearing into the shadows between the rock formations. She moves with the hesitant certainty of someone following half-remembered paths rather than clear knowledge. Their journey begins with Tobias following a child through terrain he doesn't recognize, his survival instincts screaming at the vulnerability of their position. The night air feels heavy against his skin, carrying scents of dry earth and something else, something predatory. The shadow stalkers patrol these wastes, silent predators that hunt through vibration and fear scent. They move like living darkness, their forms blending with the night, until only their glowing eyes betray their presence. Tobias feels their attention before he sees them, that primal awareness of being watched that sets his nerves on edge. His hand moves toward his sword automatically, years of training overriding his attempts at quiet movement. When 6 pairs of glowing eyes appear in the darkness ahead, Tobias reaches for his blade. The metal whispers against leather as it begins to clear the scabbard. Ileliana's small hand catches his wrist with surprising strength. Her touch feels cool against his skin, a brief connection in the tense darkness. "No steel," she whispers, her voice barely audible. They hear vibration. The words carry the weight of hard-learned experience. Many cultures develop sonic tools for predator deterrence, using sound rather than force to navigate dangerous territories. The Lacostran people have their own version of this ancient practice, passed down through generations who learned to survive alongside creatures that would tear apart armed warriors. Ileliana's knowledge comes not from combat training, but from cultural memory, from stories told around evening fires in a language softer than the nomadic tongue Tobias knows. She begins to hum a low, vibrating tone that seems to resonate through the very rock beneath their feet. The sound feels physical, a palpable vibration that spreads through the air like ripples in water. It's the song of passing, a specific melody designed to communicate non-threat to creatures that understand vibration better than words. Her small body trembles with the effort of maintaining the precise frequency, the notes flowing from her like a steady current. The stalkers pause their advance, their glowing eyes narrowing to slits. The creatures seem to listen, their heads tilting in unison as they process the unfamiliar sound. For a long moment, nothing moves in the darkness except the subtle shift of predator bodies considering their options. The air feels thick with tension, each second stretching into what feels like minutes of silent negotiation between species. Then the creatures retreat into deeper shadows, their forms dissolving back into the night from which they emerged. The glowing eyes disappear one by one, until only the normal darkness of the wasteland remains. The humming stops, leaving behind a silence that feels suddenly empty after the strange exchange. Tobias realizes his hand still rests on his sword hilt, frozen in the moment before action. He understands now that this girl possesses weapons he never learned in all his years of combat training. Her knowledge comes from a different tradition entirely, one that seeks to understand rather than dominate, to communicate rather than destroy. The realization shifts something fundamental in their relationship. This is no longer simply protector and protected. They have become partners in survival, each bringing different skills to the dangerous journey ahead. Her small hand releases his wrist and they continue forward into the darkness, the dynamic between them permanently altered by that moment of shared vulnerability and unexpected strength. The moon doesn't just rise, It bleeds across the sky in a slow, ominous spread of crimson light. Tobias notes the phenomenon with professional concern, his eyes tracking the unnatural coloration as it stains the night. The red glow washes over the landscape, turning familiar rock formations into twisted shapes that seem to pulse with malevolent energy. His combat training included lunar cycles and their effects on night operations. But nothing prepared him for this spectral transformation. Galeliana's small hand grabs his arm with sudden urgency, her fingers digging into his sleeve. The blood moon calls them home. Her voice holds a tremor that has nothing to do with the cold night air. The words carry weight beyond their simple meaning, echoing with ancient warnings passed down through generations of her people. Her eyes reflect the crimson light, making them look like pools of freshly spilled blood in her pale face. The ground beneath their feet begins to tremble, a deep vibration that starts as a subtle hum and builds to a shaking that rattles stones loose from nearby slopes. Something massive moves beneath the surface, stirring after long dormancy. The vibration travels up through Tobias's boots, a physical sensation that speaks of unimaginable power, stirring in the deep places of the world. Dust rises from the shaking earth, catching the red light like particles of dried blood hanging in the air. A deep walker emerges from the fractured ground, a behemoth of rock and rage that defies simple description. It rises like a mountain deciding to stand, its form composed of stone plates that grind against each other with sounds like continents colliding. Glowing fissures pattern its surface, pulsing with the same crimson light that fills the sky. The creature stands taller than 3 nomad wagons stacked together, its presence dominating the landscape. Tobias automatically prepares to fight, his body shifting into combat stance as his hand reaches for his sword. The military training kicks in, assessing threats and planning engagement strategies. He calculates angles of attack, weak points in the stone armor, possible retreat paths. The creature's sheer size makes the calculations feel meaningless, but the habit of resistance runs deep in his muscles. Galeliana pulls him behind a rock formation with surprising strength for her small frame. Her touch breaks his combat focus, redirecting his attention. She keeps her voice low but urgent, explaining that these creatures aren't hunting. They're answering a call older than human settlement on this world. Her words carry the certainty of cultural knowledge, the kind passed down through stories around communal fires. She describes how the walkers move according to cycles older than memory, responding to celestial events that predate human arrival on Eridan 6. Their movement patterns follow deep geological rhythms rather than predator instincts. The blood moon acts as a trigger, a signal that rouses them from their long slumber beneath the planet's crust. They journey toward ancient meeting places, following paths etched into the world's bedrock. The walker continues its slow, deliberate movement across the landscape, paying no attention to the 2 small creatures hiding behind the rocks. Its massive feet leave craters in the earth, each step causing minor tremors that ripple through the ground. The air fills with the sound of grinding stone and the deep hum of its internal workings, a noise that seems to vibrate directly in the bones. Then the creature recedes as suddenly as it appeared, sinking back into the earth with the same deliberate motion it used to emerge. The ground closes behind it, leaving only fresh fractures in the rock as evidence of its passage. The crimson light begins to fade from the moon, returning gradually to its normal silver glow. The silence that follows feels heavier than the earlier vibrations. Tobias understands that this world operates on rules he doesn't yet comprehend. His military training covered terrain, weather patterns, enemy tactics, all things within human understanding. But the Deep Walker belongs to a different order of reality altogether, something ancient and fundamentally alien to human experience. The realization humbles him, making his years of combat experience feel suddenly limited in scope. Where Deep Walkers pass, blood wolves always follow. The crimson moonlight makes their coarse fur look like moving wounds against the dark landscape. Their eyes catch the red glow, shining like fresh blood drops in the shadows between rock formations. Tobias counts 6 shapes moving at the edge of visibility. Then his trained eye catches 2 more shifting positions farther out. 8 total, forming coordinated hunting patterns that speak of practiced teamwork. They move with the disciplined spacing of military scouts, maintaining visual contact while covering different angles. The wolves don't attack immediately. They begin testing defenses first, probing for weakness like experienced combatants assessing enemy positions. 1 wolf approaches from the left while 2 others circle to the right, creating diversionary movements. Their coordination shows sophisticated tactical thinking beyond simple animal instinct. Eleliana tries her humming technique again, the same song that worked against the shadow stalkers. The low vibration rolls across the space between them and the wolves. The creatures pause for a moment, ears twitching at the unfamiliar sound. Then they resume their advance, completely unaffected by the sonic deterrent. These predators operate on different rules than the vibration-sensitive stalkers. Animal behavior studies confirm that canines often demonstrate sophisticated tactical coordination in hunting situations. The blood wolves exemplify this principle perfectly. They communicate through subtle body shifts and almost inaudible growls, maintaining formation while adjusting their approach based on the target's reactions. Tobias recognizes the patterns instantly. The wolves move exactly like nomad combat teams testing enemy defenses before engagement. The flanking maneuvers, the feints and probes, the way they maintain spacing while closing distance, all mirror the tactics drilled into him since childhood. The familiarity feels unsettling, like watching his own training exercises played out by wild animals. He decides to use their tactics against them. Tobias creates a deliberate false vulnerability, opening his left side as if protecting Eleliana, while leaving what appears to be an undefended angle. The wolves respond exactly as nomad warriors would. The pack leader signals two wolves to exploit the apparent weakness, while the others prepare to press the main attack. As the two wolves charge the opening, Tobias shifts suddenly. His bowstring sings twice in quick succession, the arrows finding their marks with practiced precision. The first wolf drops silently, the second stumbles with a shaft through its shoulder. A third wolf attacks from the blind side he anticipated, meeting his suddenly drawn blade instead of unprotected flesh. They take down 3 wolves before the remaining 5 reassess the situation. The pack leader emits a low growl that signals retreat rather than renewed attack. The survivors melt back into the darkness, leaving their wounded and dead behind. The encounter ends as suddenly as it began, the remaining wolves choosing preservation over continued engagement. The fight feels disturbingly familiar to Tobias. The movements, the strategies, the way he anticipated their patterns, it all comes back too easily, like practicing lessons he thought he'd forgotten years ago. His body remembers the dance of combat, the flow of attack and counterattack that was drilled into him through countless training sessions. The ease with which he slipped back into that mindset troubles him more than the actual fight. The blood on his blade looks black in the fading crimson light, another reminder of skills he hoped never to use again. Weapons line the walls in organized rows, each piece positioned for quick access. Some show classic nomadic craftsmanship, curved blades with spiral-etched hilts, compact crossbows with tension mechanisms unique to their culture. Others clearly come from colonial forces, energy rifles with modified power cells, armor-piercing sidearms with serial numbers filed off. Every weapon bears modifications for increased killing efficiency, extended magazines, sharpened edges, sighting systems adjusted for specific conditions. She unrolls a map on a flat stone table, the material made from stitched animal skin treated to resist moisture. The surface shows Eridan 6's continental layout with startling accuracy, far more detailed than any chart Tobias has seen before. Markings cluster across the terrain in specific patterns, each symbol representing something significant about the location. Historical patterns show that outcasts often become information brokers through necessity. Lyra exemplifies this transformation, turning her exile into an opportunity to gather intelligence others would overlook. Her position outside normal social structures gives her access to information flows that remain invisible to those within the system. The map represents years of observation, infiltration, and careful documentation. The markings reveal their father's plans extend far beyond simple raids. Concentric circles around settlement zones indicate planned expansion territories. Lines connecting resource deposits to transportation routes show systematic colonization patterns. This isn't random violence but calculated conquest, the kind that erases existing cultures and replaces them with nomadic rule. The scale of ambition takes Tobias's breath away. Lyra points to a cluster of marks near the Pass of Winds, her finger tracing the narrow valley that cuts through the mountain range. The symbols here differ from others on the map. Smaller, more numerous, arranged in precise formations that suggest temporary positions rather than permanent installations. Her nail taps against a particular grouping where the marks form a tight defensive pattern. The captives become collateral in a much larger game. Their value lies not in ransom or labor, but as bargaining chips in territorial negotiations. Healers represent strategic assets in any colonization effort. Their skills can determine whether new settlements thrive or fail. Controlling them means controlling the health of entire communities, making them valuable leverage in larger political maneuvers. Tobias realizes saving one healer might prevent countless deaths. If their father's plans proceed unchecked, entire regions will fall under nomadic control through methods that leave no room for dissent or compromise. The healers represent an alternative approach to power, one based on preservation rather than domination. Their survival could undermine the very foundation of the colonization strategy, offering communities options beyond submission or destruction. The personal mission expands into something larger, connecting individual rescue to systemic change. 3 damaged people calculate their odds against an army in the cold light of Lyra's cave. The air hums with the low vibration of a portable power unit, casting shifting blue patterns across their faces. Tobias studies Lyra's map, his fingers tracing the routes and markings with a soldier's instinctive understanding of terrain and threat. The leathery surface feels smooth under his touch, each symbol representing danger or opportunity in equal measure. He moves slowly, absorbing details that could mean the difference between success and disaster. Eleliana tends to minor wounds with quiet efficiency, her small hands cleaning a cut on Lyra's forearm with practiced movements. She uses herbs from her pouch, crushing them into a paste that smells sharply of earth and healing. The contrast between her gentle actions and their violent surroundings feels like a small act of defiance against the world outside. Her focus remains complete, as if this moment of care matters as much as any battle plan. Lyra wants to destroy the weapon caches marked on the map, her finger stabbing at the clustered symbols representing her father's strategic reserves. Her voice holds the cold certainty of someone who believes in cutting problems off at the root. She talks about explosive yields and structural weaknesses, her words painting pictures of controlled demolition and targeted sabotage. Each plan focuses on maximum damage with minimal risk, the calculations of someone who has learned to fight from the shadows. Tobias wants to save the captives first, his attention fixed on the marked caravan route through the Pass of Winds. He argues for precision extraction over wholesale destruction, his experience telling him that rescue missions require different priorities than sabotage operations. His suggestions focus on diversion and disruption rather than elimination, on creating windows for escape rather than opportunities for attack. The disagreement creates tension that hums almost as loudly as the power unit. Eleliana speaks softly while wrapping a clean bandage around Lyra's arm. My mother would say both are healing. Her voice carries the simple conviction of someone who hasn't yet learned to complicate morality with strategy. She sees destroying weapons and saving lives as 2 aspects of the same purpose rather than competing objectives. Her words hang in the air, challenging their binary thinking with a child's directness. Research confirms unlikely alliances often succeed through complementary skill sets. Lyra knows nomadic tactics intimately, understanding their patrol patterns, communication methods, and response protocols. She can predict their movements because she was trained alongside them, her mind working with the same ruthless logic that governs their operations. Her knowledge comes from inside the system, making her predictions frighteningly accurate. Tobias understands discipline and terrain, his years of exile teaching him how to use landscape as both weapon and shield. He reads the rock formations and wind patterns like text, seeing opportunities where others see only obstacles. His military training gives him structural understanding of how to maintain formations under pressure, how to execute complex maneuvers with limited resources. His approach balances aggression with conservation, force with patience. Eleliana offers something neither possesses, moral clarity untouched by compromise. Her determination to save her mother gives their mission an emotional center that transcends tactics or strategy. She reminds them that behind every symbol on the map lies a person worth saving, a life that matters beyond its strategic value. Her presence anchors their planning in human terms rather than abstract objectives. They need to ambush the caravan where it's most vulnerable, choosing ground that neutralizes the nomad's numerical advantage. The discussion turns practical again, focused on timing, positioning, and contingency planning. Lyra suggests using the environment itself as a weapon, creating obstacles that will slow the wagons without endangering the captives. Tobias emphasizes the importance of clear signals and fallback positions, preparing for the moment when plans inevitably fracture under pressure. The passive winds offers narrow passages perfect for traps, its high walls creating natural choke points that will compress the caravan into manageable segments. The rock formations provide cover for ambushers, while limiting the nomads' ability to deploy their full strength. The steep slopes will slow any attempt to flank their position, giving them control over the engagement's pace and scope. The plan forms gradually, taking shape through shared knowledge and grudging respect for each other's capabilities. It becomes part rescue, part sabotage, all redemption, a complex operation that serves multiple purposes simultaneously. They assign roles based on strengths, with Lyra handling explosives and disruption, Tobias managing the extraction itself, and Aleliana guiding the captives to safety once freed. The division feels natural, each person contributing what they do best toward a common goal that somehow satisfies their individual needs as well. Lyra teaches Tobias modifications to standard nomadic traps, her hands moving with quick precision as she adjusts tension wires and trigger mechanisms. She shows him how to alter the angle of pitfalls to capture rather than impale, how to set snares that restrain without breaking limbs. Each modification feels like a small betrayal of his training, the lessons his father drilled into him about maximum damage and minimal mercy. His fingers remember the original configurations instinctively, the muscle memory fighting against these new adjustments that prioritize preservation over destruction. Aleliana gathers plants along the pass walls, her small hands selecting specific leaves and roots with careful attention. She crushes them into pastes that smell sharply of mint and something earthier, mixing them with water from her flask. These preparations cause disorientation without permanent harm, creating temporary confusion rather than lasting injury. Her knowledge comes from healer traditions that understand the body's responses to natural substances. Many indigenous cultures use environmental materials for non-lethal combat, developing methods that disable opponents without causing irreversible damage. The Lacostran approach reflects this philosophy, turning the landscape itself into a tool for protection rather than destruction. Aleliana's mixtures represent generations of accumulated knowledge about how to neutralize threats without crossing into killing. Aleliana leads them upward into treacherous heights, her small form moving with unexpected confidence across the shifting scree slopes. The shortcut requires climbing skills Tobias didn't know the girl possessed. She finds handholds in seemingly smooth rock faces and tests each foothold before committing her weight. Her movements show a familiarity with dangerous terrain that seems improbable for a healer's daughter from the lowlands. They find the body in a narrow passage between two rock formations. The dead nomad lies face down, one arm twisted awkwardly beneath him. The killing wasn't done by animals. The precision of the wound speaks of deliberate violence. A single clean strike between the shoulder blades, perfectly placed to sever the spinal cord instantly. No animal leaves such surgical damage. The body bears the familiar spiral marks of the iron nomads, but with a crucial difference. A fresh slash cuts through the design, marring the pattern that Tobias knows so well. The mark looks recent, the edges still raw and inflamed against the skin. The modification changes everything about what this symbol represents. Tobias recognizes the meaning immediately. This was an exile like him, someone cast out from the nomadic tribes and marked accordingly. Many cultures use physical modifications to indicate status changes, turning tattoos or scars into living records of social standing. The slashed spiral tells a story of rejection and banishment written directly on the skin. The killing strike shows professional precision from someone who knew nomadic anatomy intimately. The blade found the exact gap between vertebrae that their armor doesn't cover. Only someone trained in their combat methods would know that particular weakness. The attack wasn't random. Violence, it was targeted execution by someone. Understanding nomadic vulnerabilities perfectly, Aleliana studies the body with clinical detachment. That seems surprising for a healer's daughter. She examines the wound without flinching, her fingers hovering just above the fatal injury. Her eyes track the angle of entry, the depth of penetration, the lack of defensive wounds. She reads the violence like text, absorbing details that would make most healers look away. Her calm assessment feels unnatural for someone so young. The implications settle heavily on Tobias. Someone else hunts the nomads, and they're dangerously good at it. This killer moves through their territory with confidence, taking down trained warriors with efficient precision. The mountains suddenly feel less like a shortcut and more like a carefully set trap. Every shadow between the rocks could conceal another hunter waiting for the right moment. The narrow passages that seemed like protection now feel like confinement. The high ground offers visibility, but also makes them easier to spot against the skyline. Tobias recalculates their route instinctively, his military training overriding the girl's knowledge of the terrain. He starts looking for alternative paths that offer more cover and better escape options. The phosphorescent fungi glowing in nearby caverns provide faint illumination that suddenly feels exposed rather than helpful. The soft blue light makes them visible to anyone watching from the darkness. Tobias finds himself listening more carefully to the wind, searching for sounds that don't belong in the natural landscape. Their mission has suddenly become more complicated than a simple rescue operation. They're moving through territory where at least two dangerous groups operate, the nomads holding Aleliana's mother, and whoever is systematically hunting those same nomads. The mountains have become a hunting ground where they might be both predators and prey, depending on who finds them first. The safe passage Aleliana promised now feels like dangerous ground where multiple threats converge. The attack comes from above without warning, a sudden rush of movement from the shadowed rock formations overhead. A knife blade flashes in the moonlight, aiming directly for Tobias's throat with lethal precision. He barely deflects it in time, his own blade meeting the strike with a sharp ring of metal on metal that echoes through the narrow pass. The impact vibrates up his arm, a familiar sensation he hasn't felt in years. His opponent moves with familiar economy of motion, each action stripped of unnecessary movement. The footwork, the angle of attack, the way she pivots after the blocked strike, all mirror the combat style drilled into him since childhood. The efficiency speaks of identical training. The same brutal lessons learned on the same training grounds under the same harsh instructors. Moonlight catches the woman's face as she shifts position, revealing features both changed and hauntingly recognizable. Scars map across her skin like new topography over familiar land. One cuts through her left eyebrow. Another pulls slightly at the corner of her mouth. The face beneath the damage belongs to someone declared dead years ago, someone he watched disappear into exile. She whispers a name he hasn't heard in years, the letters hanging in the cold air between them. LRA. The designation sounds strange after so long, like finding an old weapon that still fits your hand perfectly. The nickname belonged to his half-sister Lyra, the unwanted child their father never fully acknowledged, but trained alongside his legitimate heirs. Military research confirms siblings often share combat styles despite separation, developing identical muscle memory from common training. Their movements mirror each other perfectly, attack and defense flowing in patterns learned from the same instructors. Each faint encounter feels like dancing with a ghost from his past, every blocked strike echoing with memories of childhood sparring sessions. Lyra should be dead. Their father declared it so after her exile, announcing her execution for treason against the nomadic codes. He described the method, the location, the witnesses. The story became part of family legend, a warning about the consequences of defiance. Yet here she stands before him, very much alive and more dangerous than anyone he's encountered in 6 years. Her spiral mark bears the same slash he saw on the dead nomad's body, the scar cutting through the pattern with violent finality. The mutilation looks recent, the edges still pink and raised against her skin. The mark tells its own story of exile and survival, of someone cast out but refusing to die quietly in the wilderness. She survived exile better than he did by embracing the violence their father taught them. Where Tobias sought solitude and avoidance, Lyra clearly chose confrontation and adaptation. Her weapons show modifications he doesn't recognize, blends of nomadic craftsmanship and something else entirely. Her eyes scan him with cold assessment, measuring his usefulness rather than recognizing kinship. Her gaze holds no warmth, only professional evaluation. She studies his stance, his weapons, the way he holds himself after years away from combat. The assessment feels clinical, like examining equipment rather than reuniting with family. She seems to be calculating his value as an asset rather than remembering their shared past. The silence stretches between them, broken only by the wind moving through the rock formations. Leliana stands frozen nearby, her small form pressed against the stone wall of the pass. Tobias keeps his blade raised but doesn't advance, watching his sister watch him with those cold, measuring eyes. The confrontation has become something more complicated than a simple attack. It's a reunion neither of them expected or particularly wanted. Lyra's scars form a topographical map across her skin, each marking a chapter in a story Tobias doesn't want to read. A thick ridge crosses her cheekbone where a blade found its mark. Burn patterns spiderweb down her right arm from some energy weapon discharge. These aren't the clean wounds of honorable combat, but the ragged evidence of survival through brutal means. Each scar speaks of moments where violence was the only currency that mattered. She leads them to a cave concealed behind what appears to be a waterfall of black dust. The particles cascade down the rock face in a constant shimmering curtain that hides the opening completely. The dust smells of oxidized metal and something else. Something like static electricity that makes the hairs on Tobias's arms stand up. Passing through the curtain feels like moving through a barrier between worlds. The particles clinging to their clothing like dark snow. Her shelter makes Tobias's cliffside refuge look like a child's play fort by comparison. The space stretches deep into the mountain, with multiple chambers branching off from the main cavern. Reinforced supports brace the ceiling at regular intervals, showing engineering knowledge beyond simple survival. Storage shelves carved directly into the rock walls hold supplies organized with military precision. The air tastes clean and filtered, free from the ever-present caustic dust of the outside world. They position rockfalls at strategic points along the pass, choosing locations where the canyon narrows naturally. The rocks balance precariously on ledges, held in place by carefully arranged trigger systems. These won't crush the wagons, just block their advance and create barriers that force the nomads into predetermined paths. The placements consider angles of retreat and advance, controlling movement rather than preventing it entirely. Pit traps dot the planned route, their openings covered with lightweight mesh and dust to conceal their presence. These won't break legs, just slow progress and create moments of vulnerability. The depth calculations allow for escape while still achieving the desired delay. Each trap sits where the terrain naturally funnels movement, using the landscape's existing features to enhance effectiveness. Sound distractions occupy the spaces between physical traps. Lyra places vibration plates that will emit low frequencies when triggered, sounds that disrupt communication and coordination without causing pain. These act as force multipliers, amplifying the confusion caused by the physical obstacles. The placement considers how sound travels through the narrow pass, creating overlapping zones of auditory disruption. Tobias's arrows now carry Eleliana's herbal mixtures in small clay tips that shatter on impact. The preparations will create disorienting clouds around their targets, affecting anyone nearby without requiring direct hits. He tests the weight distribution, adjusting his aim slightly for the modified projectiles. The arrows still fly true, but now they carry something other than death at their points. Lyra sets trigger wires almost invisible to nomadic scouts, using fishing line from her supplies and dust from the pass itself to camouflage their presence. The wires connect multiple traps into coordinated systems that will activate in sequence rather than isolation. This creates cascading effects that overwhelm response capabilities through timing and coordination, rather than raw force. The ambush doesn't require killing, just confusion and delay. The preparations focus on controlling the engagement's pace and direction, creating opportunities for extraction, rather than ensuring destruction. Every element serves the dual purpose of protecting the rescuers while minimizing harm to everyone involved. Captives and captors alike. They work through the night, three shadows moving through the moonlit pass with quiet purpose. The rock walls glow faintly in the darkness, their surfaces reflecting the dim light in patches of silver and gray. Their movements become rhythmic and coordinated through shared focus rather than discussion, each person understanding their role in the larger preparation. The cold night air carries the scent of disturbed dust and crushed herbs, smells that speak of careful planning rather than random violence. The preparations challenge an empire using methods that empire wouldn't recognize as warfare. They turn the nomads' own tactics against them, but reshape those tactics to serve different purposes. The traps waiting in the darkness represent not just physical obstacles, but philosophical statements about how conflict can be conducted. When the first light touches the highest cliffs, everything stands ready, a landscape transformed into a tool for redemption rather than destruction. The nomads arrive exactly where Lyra predicted, Their caravan moving through the pass with the steady rhythm of practiced military formation. Dust rises from the wheels of 5 heavy wagons, creating a haze that hangs in the narrow canyon. The sound of marching feet and rolling wheels echoes off the stone walls, amplifying the sense of approaching force. Tobias counts 20 warriors maintaining disciplined positions around the convoy, their armor catching the morning light in flashes of polished metal. He recognizes his brother Marcus leading the vanguard, his familiar posture visible even at distance. Marcus wears their father's colors, the dark blue and silver of the nomadic command structure, but carries himself with the authority of someone who already considers himself a warlord. His movements show confidence bordering on arrogance, the easy command of someone accustomed to obedience. The way he scans the canyon speaks of training rather than actual vigilance, going through motions without true engagement. The captives move slowly between the second and third wagons, their steps uneven on the rough terrain. These are healers, people accustomed to careful movement in sterile environments, not forced marches through harsh landscapes. Their hands, usually employed in precise healing work, now hang limp or clutch at the rough clothing provided by their captors. The contrast between their gentle profession and their current situation feels particularly cruel. Military research confirms caravan security often weakens at predictable points. The formation follows standard patterns: scouts ahead, main force surrounding the valuable elements, rear guard watching behind. The structure prioritizes defense against ground-based threats from front and rear, leaving the elevated positions along the canyon walls as potential vulnerabilities. The nomads focus on what they expect rather than what might actually threaten them. The rear guard maintains position 30 meters behind the last wagon, their attention fixed on the empty trail behind them. They watch for pursuit or attack from the direction they've already traveled, their bodies angled away from the canyon walls above. This positioning creates a blind spot directly overhead, an oversight born of habitual thinking rather than adaptive strategy. Their formation assumes enemies will approach like themselves, along the ground rather than from the heights. Eleliana spots her mother in the third group of captives, her small frame straightening suddenly beside Tobias. The woman stands barely upright, one hand pressed against the wagon side for support. Her face shows the strain of difficult travel, but her eyes still hold the calm focus of a healer assessing a situation. Even in captivity, she maintains that professional detachment that defines her work. Her daughter's breath catches at the sight, a soft sound that speaks volumes in the quiet morning air. Tobias feels the spiral on his arm burn with sudden intensity. The sensation differs from each and the occasions. This isn't the shameful heat of past failures, but the focused energy of clear purpose. The mark feels like a targeting mechanism aligning with his intentions, a physical manifestation of decision made. The warmth spreads up his arm, carrying with it the certainty that this path, however dangerous, is the correct one. He nods to Lyra positioned across the canyon, a simple dip of his chin that carries more meaning than words could convey. The movement signals readiness, agreement, and commitment all at once. Her answering nod comes instantly, her form barely visible against the rock face but her understanding clear across the distance. The communication needs no elaboration between two people who share training and now share purpose. The ambush begins not with noise but with silence, the moment stretching as both of them draw breath and focus. The first rock falls almost soundlessly, its descent starting the chain of events that will determine whether rescue or disaster awaits. The caravan continues its steady progress below, unaware that the canyon itself has become a weapon against them. The first rockfall separates the wagons perfectly, creating precisely the gaps Lyra predicted. Stones cascade down the canyon walls with calculated precision, landing exactly where planned to isolate the rear guard from the main caravan. The noise echoes through the pass, a controlled avalanche that achieves its purpose without unnecessary destruction. Dust billows up in thick clouds, momentarily obscuring vision and adding another layer of confusion to the carefully orchestrated chaos. Nomads scatter exactly as Lyra's models forecasted, their movements following patterns drilled into them through years of training. They seek cover along the canyon walls, grouping into defensive formations that leave the captives momentarily unattended. The discipline that makes them effective warriors now works against them, their predictable responses creating opportunities for the rescuers. Their training emphasizes coordinated action, but confusion tactics exploit this very strength by disrupting the coordination itself. Marcus doesn't panic amid the chaos. His voice cuts through the noise with familiar commands, rallying warriors with the same authority their father used. He barks orders that redirect attention to the canyon walls, his eyes scanning for threats while maintaining control of the situation. His response shows why their father favored him: the ability to think clearly under pressure, to turn disorder back into structure through force of will and practiced leadership. Tobias's herbal arrows find their marks with silent efficiency. The clay tips shatter against armor and ground, releasing clouds of disorienting powder that drift through the confined space. Sentries slump against wagon wheels or lean heavily on their weapons, their movements becoming sluggish and uncoordinated. The non-lethal approach creates gaps in the security perimeter, without adding more bodies to the already chaotic scene. Eleliana slips between confused nomads to reach the captives, her small size becoming an advantage in the crowded space. She moves like smoke through the disorganized ranks, her focus entirely on the group of healers huddled near the third wagon. Her mother's eyes meet hers across the short distance, recognition and fear warring in her expression. The connection lasts only a moment before Eleliana continues her careful advance. Research confirms confusion tactics work best against disciplined opponents because they exploit predictable behavior patterns. The nomads' training emphasizes orderly responses to threats, making them vulnerable to attacks that disrupt their command structure and communication. The carefully planned ambush turns their strengths into weaknesses, using their discipline against them through precisely timed disruptions. Lyra takes down 3 warriors using their own training against them. She moves through the chaos with economy of motion, disabling opponents with pressure point strikes and joint locks rather than lethal force. Each takedown looks almost casual, the result of perfect timing and intimate knowledge of nomadic combat techniques. She becomes a ghost in the disorder, using the confusion as cover for her precise interventions. Tobias sees Marcus looking directly at him across the chaotic scene. Recognition flashes in his brother's eyes, followed immediately by cold betrayal. The moment stretches between them, everything else fading into background noise. Marcus's expression shows not just surprise but something deeper. The bitterness of family loyalty broken, of shared history turned into opposition. The rescue works perfectly until it doesn't. The carefully orchestrated plan fractures at the edges as Marcus breaks from his command position. He moves through the chaos with single-minded purpose, shoving confused warriors aside without explanation. His sword clears its scabbard with a sound that cuts through the general noise, the blade catching the morning light as he advances. Marcus breaks through the final line of disoriented nomads, his movements too fast and determined for the herbal mist to affect him. His eyes remain locked on Tobias, all tactical considerations forgotten in favor of personal confrontation. The sword in his hand aims directly for Tobias's heart, its point steady despite the rushing advance. The brother versus brother dynamic transforms the rescue into something more personal and dangerous, where shared history becomes the sharpest weapon of all. Their blades meet with the sound of shared history breaking, the ring of metal on metal echoing through the dusty canyon. Each impact carries the weight of childhood sparring sessions and training yard lessons, of moments when they practiced these same moves as brothers rather than enemies. The familiarity makes the conflict feel surreal, like fighting his own reflection in a distorted mirror. Marcus fights with their father's brutal and efficient style, every movement optimized for maximum damage with minimal effort. His attacks come in precise combinations, each strike flowing into the next with practiced grace. He uses economy of motion, wasting no energy on flourishes or unnecessary movements. This is pure nomadic combat doctrine, the very essence of their father's teachings about ending fights quickly and decisively. Tobias defends without attacking, his parries and blocks recalling countless childhood sparring matches. He remembers the feel of practice blades clacking together in the training yard, the way their father would critique their form. The memories flash through his mind with each deflection. Marcus at 12, stubborn and determined. Marcus at 15, starting to surpass him. Marcus now, fully embracing the legacy Tobias rejected. The defensive posture feels both instinctive and deliberate, a refusal to fully engage in the violence being offered. Marcus shouts accusations between strikes, his voice cutting through the combat sounds. Traitor, coward, weakling. Each word lands with more force than the physical blows. The insults carry specific weight, referencing moments from their shared past that only they understand. They aren't random taunts, but targeted psychological strikes aimed at vulnerabilities Marcus knows. Intimately, studies show familial combat often involves psychological warfare that leverages intimate knowledge of shared history. Marcus uses this advantage perfectly. His words designed to undermine Tobias's resolve by attacking the very foundations of his identity. Each accusation connects to specific moments of conflict or failure from their past, turning the physical fight into an emotional battleground as well. Tobias sees Ileliana freeing her mother from the far side of the caravan. The girl moves with determined grace, ignoring his earlier order to stay hidden during the combat. Her small hands work quickly at the bonds holding the captives, her focus entirely on the rescue despite the danger surrounding them. The sight breaks his concentration for a critical second, his protective instincts warring with his defensive posture. Distracted by Ileliana's movements, Tobias doesn't see Marcus's dagger until it's already in his side. The blade slips past his guard during that moment of inattention, finding the gap between armor plates with practiced precision. The pain comes sharp and immediate, a familiar sensation that transports him instantly back to training accidents and childhood injuries. The physical shock reverberates through his body, followed by the colder realization of being wounded. The pain feels familiar, another lesson from their father about the cost of distraction. He remembers the old man's voice during training sessions, focus determines survival. The memory blends with the current agony, creating a strange echo across years of separation. The wound itself mirrors one he received during sparring long ago, in the very same location from the very same brother. As he falls, his vision narrowing around the pain, he sees Lyra standing over Marcus with a drawn bow. Her posture shows perfect form, the arrow already aimed and ready. Her expression holds no hesitation, only cold assessment of the situation. The bowstring sits at full tension, her fingers steady despite the chaos around them. Her presence creates a sudden shift in the confrontation's dynamics, introducing a new variable that changes everything. The arrow points directly at Marcus's exposed back, its tip catching the morning light. Lyra's position gives her a clean shot, with no obstructions between her and her target. Her eyes meet Tobias's briefly across the distance, and in that look he sees not family loyalty, but calculated decision-making. She has become the wild card in their familial conflict, the unexpected element that could end this struggle in seconds. The dust settles around them as time seems to slow, the fight frozen at its most critical moment. Tobias feels the warmth of blood spreading through his clothing, the physical reality of the injury grounding him in the present. Marcus stands over him, momentarily triumphant but unaware of the threat behind him. The three siblings exist in perfect balance for one breathless moment, each holding a different position in their tangled family drama. Darius emerges from the largest wagon exactly as remembered, only older and colder. The years have carved deeper lines around his mouth but left his posture unchanged, that same rigid authority that made warriors flinch. He steps down from the wagon with deliberate slowness, his eyes scanning the scene without apparent alarm. The dust settles around him like a shroud, particles catching the light as they drift through the morning air. He looks at his wounded son first, taking in the blood soaking through Tobias's side with clinical detachment. His gaze shifts to Lyra standing with bow still drawn, her expression defiant rather than fearful. Finally, he surveys the ruined ambush, the disabled warriors, the freed captives. His assessment feels comprehensive and utterly calm, as if reviewing training exercises rather than real conflict. Instead of ordering their deaths, Darius smiles. The expression transforms his face into something more terrifying than anger. It's a cold stretching of lips that never reaches his eyes, a gesture that feels more threatening than any weapon. The smile speaks of calculations being made, of plans within plans that the others cannot yet see. "Take them and go," he says to Lyra. His voice carries across the distance without needing to rise, that familiar tone of command that brooks no argument. The words hang in the air for a moment, their meaning not immediately processing. Then he adds the phrase that changes everything. "Consider this your inheritance." He throws the map at her feet with a deliberate underhand toss. The rolled skin lands between them, kicking up a small puff of dust. The gesture feels both dismissive and significant, like throwing scraps to animals while maintaining dominance. The map contains everything: weapon cache locations, planned routes, strategic positions, all offered up without struggle. Psychological profiles show dominant figures often use calculated mercy as control. Darius demonstrates this perfectly, turning what could be defeat into another form of domination. By letting them leave, he maintains control over the situation's narrative. He becomes the one who grants life rather than the one who suffers loss. The act reinforces his authority while undermining theirs. The remaining nomads withdraw without questioning the order. They gather their disoriented companions and begin regrouping with practiced efficiency. Their obedience is absolute, reflecting years of conditioning to follow Darius's commands without hesitation. The wagons start moving again, the captives now forgotten as the convoy resumes its journey through the pass. Eleliana reaches Tobias, her small hands already pulling medical supplies from her pouch. She applies pressure to his wound with practiced movements, her fingers firm against the bleeding. Her mother joins her, their similar healing techniques working in silent coordination. The two healers focus entirely on the injury, their attention shutting out the retreating nomads and the continuing danger. Darius leaves them alive not from love, but from contempt. His mercy is the ultimate expression of disregard. Treating them as insignificant enough to spare, the act says they matter too little to warrant finishing off, that their rebellion barely registers as a threat worth eliminating. It's a psychological wound that may cut deeper than any physical injury. The real war hasn't begun. This was merely the opening move. Darius's retreat isn't surrender but strategic repositioning. He has seen their capabilities, assessed their alliances, and now understands what he faces. The next encounter will be different, planned with the cold precision that made him warlord. This skirmish was just the first testing of defenses, the initial probe that allows proper planning for the main assault. His wagon disappears around the bend, leaving behind only dust and the certainty that this conflict has only just begun. Lyra picks up the map from the dust where her father threw it. The rolled animal skin feels heavy in her hands, the weight of knowledge and obligation transferred through that simple gesture. She looks from Tobias's bleeding form to the retreating nomads, her expression unreadable. The dust cloud surrounding Darius's wagons grows smaller in the distance, the sound of their departure fading into the canyon's natural noises. Her eyes linger on the disappearing figures, then return to the wounded man at her feet. Their alliance lasted precisely as long as the ambush required. The temporary partnership forged in Lyra's cave dissolves now that the immediate objective has been achieved. She studies Tobias with clinical detachment, assessing his injury with the same objective eye she would use on any tactical situation. The blood soaking through his clothing suggests a serious wound, but not immediately fatal. Her calculations appear to balance his survival chances against her own priorities. "I'll destroy the caches," she tells Tobias, her voice flat and matter-of-fact. "You protect the healers." The division of labor makes tactical sense, separating their efforts to maximize effectiveness. Research shows divided missions often succeed where single approaches fail, allowing different skill sets to operate independently toward complementary goals. She states the plan without consultation, her tone leaving no room for discussion or alternative suggestions. She disappears into the dust left by the departing wagons, becoming a ghost returning to her private war. Her form blends with the settling particles, moving with purposeful strides toward the canyon's narrow exit. The map remains rolled tightly in her hand, a tangible representation of the burden she now carries. Her departure feels final, the closing of a temporary alliance that served its purpose and now ends without ceremony. Eleliana and her mother Serena half carry Tobias toward Lacostran lands. Their combined strength just manages to support his weight as he struggles to walk. The women move with coordinated effort, their healing instincts overriding the physical difficulty of moving a wounded man across rough terrain. Serena applies steady pressure to Tobias's side as they walk, her fingers maintaining constant contact with the injury. The blood flow has slowed but not stopped, leaving a trail of dark droplets behind them. The spiral mark on his arm bleeds along with the wound. The raised pattern shows fresh redness where the skin has broken, as if the symbol itself shares in his injury. The connection between his physical state and his past becomes visible through this simultaneous bleeding, the mark reacting to trauma as it always has throughout his life. The blood traces the spiral pattern before dripping onto the dry ground below. Tobias failed to kill his brother during their confrontation. The memory plays in his mind with perfect clarity. The opening Marcus created. The distraction that allowed the dagger strike. The moment when lethal force could have been applied but wasn't. His refusal to deliver a killing blow stands in contrast to Marcus's willingness to wound him. The choice reflects a fundamental difference in their approaches to conflict that has existed since childhood. But he saved what mattered most in this encounter. The healers walk free because of his actions, their safety secured through the ambush's success. This outcome represents a different kind of victory than his father would recognize, one measured in lives preserved rather than enemies defeated. The success feels incomplete but meaningful, a partial redemption that leaves room for future actions. The nomad's legacy splits between the two siblings now. One child chooses destruction, taking up the map to dismantle the weapon caches that could enable full-scale colonization. Her path embraces violence but redirects it toward preventing greater harm. The other child chooses protection, aligning with healers rather than warriors. His path seeks to preserve what already exists rather than destroy what threatens it. They walk toward uncertain futures, each carrying part of their inherited burden. The canyon walls rise around them, their shadows lengthening as the day progresses. The sound of Lyra's footsteps has faded completely, leaving only the labored breathing of their small group moving toward sanctuary. The dust eventually settles behind them, covering the evidence of their conflict with the patient indifference of the desert. Tobias wakes to the smell of herbs and unfamiliar kindness. The air carries scents of drying plants and clean cloth, a sharp contrast to the caustic dust that defined his existence for 6 years. His consciousness returns slowly, awareness filtering through layers of pain and confusion. The surface beneath him feels soft, yielding to his weight in ways stone never did. Light filters through woven window coverings, casting patterns that move gently with the breeze. The Lacostran dwelling feels alien after years of stone and dust. The walls curve in organic shapes rather than harsh angles, made from materials that breathe with the changing air. Sounds reach him differently here. Muffled voices from outside, the rustle of fabric partitions, the distant rhythm of daily life continuing without urgency. The space feels lived in rather than just occupied, carrying the gentle accumulation of peaceful existence. Every detail speaks of community rather than isolation. His side hurts with a deep, persistent ache that radiates through his torso. The pain feels clean somehow, different from combat wounds that carried the shame of violence. This injury speaks of protection rather than aggression, of something worth enduring pain for. The bandages wrapped around his ribs show careful work, the bindings firm but not restrictive. Each breath brings discomfort, but also the certainty that healing has begun. Eleliana and her mother Serena watch him from across the room, their observation carrying assessment without judgment. They sit working with dried plants, their fingers moving with practiced efficiency as they separate leaves from stems. Their eyes meet his when he stirs, but they don't rush to his side or demand explanations. Their calm acceptance feels like a foreign language he's only beginning to understand. They offer presence without pressure, allowing him space to orient himself. Serena speaks of Elder Morath's wisdom while continuing her work, her voice blending with the rustle of leaves. Blood isn't destiny. The words hang in the air between them, simple yet profound. She doesn't elaborate or press the point, letting the statement stand on its own merit. Her hands continue sorting herbs, the practical action grounding the philosophical concept in everyday reality. The lesson feels earned rather than given, offered without expectation of immediate acceptance. The spiral mark still identifies him as Darius's son, but Tobias now chooses what that legacy means. He keeps his weapons cleaned and ready, but their purpose has shifted from attack to protection. The blades that once served conquest now guard healing spaces. Some inheritances can't be escaped through distance or denial. They must be transformed through conscious choice. His hands remember combat but now value preservation. The mark remains on his skin, but its meaning changes with each decision to defend rather than destroy. Redemption becomes a daily practice, not a single act of absolution.